Asian markets mostly rise as investors assess Japan's fourth quarter economic growth. Sri Lanka unveils a bold economic plan, 5% growth, and resumes debt repayments. And Elon Musk unveils what he calls the smartest AI on Earth, challenging ChatGPT and DeepSeek. Hello, I'm Taiba Aydin with the latest business and finance news here on TRT World. Asian markets crept higher on Monday as investors assessed Japan's fourth quarter economic growth. The Nikkei 225 traded around the flat line, while the Topix added 0.29%. South Korea's Kospi rose 0.18%, and the small cap Kosdaq climbed 1.2%. Japan's economy beat expectations in the fourth quarter, growing by 0.7% on a quarterly basis, up from a 0.4% expansion in the third quarter and above expectations of 0.3%. On an annualized basis, GDP grew 2.8%. That lifted the yen to trade at 151.95 against the greenback. For more on this, we have Chris Weston in Melbourne. He's head of research at Pepperstone. Now, Chris, what's driven this better than expected growth in the Japanese economy?
Well, I mean, we've seen a very good number coming out, 2.8% on the deflator number there. I will sort of caveat what we've been seeing in terms of the GDP numbers for the fourth quarter is that consumption was pretty weak. It was better than expected. The market was looking for about a 30 basis point decline, and it actually grew 0.1%. So certainly, if we saw consumption far higher, then obviously bets for near-term Bank of Japan hikes would have ratcheted up. But consumption's pretty poor. Business spending as that GDP was only up 50 basis points. So again, I think we've got to put this down to what we're seeing on a fiscal level. This is no different from what we're seeing in Australia, where growth has really been supported by government spending, similar in the UK. And to an extent in the US as well, where there's been so much fiscal support for jobs. And I think that's really where we've seen the Japanese budget. So, good Japanese numbers today, sort of reinforcing what we've been seeing with the wage pressures coming through and some of the other factors. But we haven't really seen any kind of material buying of Japanese assets on these growth data points. And it certainly hasn't materially changed any kind of one's expectations about near-term Bank of Japan hikes.
Right, and the yen is also up against the USD. Is that mainly to do with the dollar or the Japanese yen's own appreciation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I sort of say that haven't seen too much of a re-rating in Japanese rate expectations, but we have seen some yen buying. To answer your question, I'd say this is more of a yen story. We haven't really seen huge amounts of selling in the dollar today across G10 FX. A little bit of buying in Aussie dollar ahead of tomorrow's RBA meeting. Kiwi dollar's up a little bit against the greenback, but euro dollar and cable are pretty flat on the day. So some US dollar selling sort of following through from the weak picture we saw last week, where the US dollar was the big underperformer. But I'd say this is predominantly a yen story today.
And we do have a number of central bank decisions from the region this week, most notably Australia, as you mentioned. What are markets pricing in at the moment?
Yeah, the RBA comes out 2:30 local time tomorrow. We've got if you look at swaps markets, they're implying an 86% chance that the RBA cut tomorrow by 25 basis points. I think the last time we saw the markets pricing above 75% implied, and the RBA went against that, was back in 2015. So, you would be very surprised if they didn't cut rates tomorrow. Some people say it's a done deal. I'm not so sure it's a done deal, but I'd certainly say that the RBA should have guided us lower if they weren't going to be cutting rates. Otherwise, they're going to be injecting a large amount of uncertainty into the rates market. So I think a cut is clearly the default position. We're going to get a pretty shallow easing cycle at best here in Australia, but I think you're probably looking at 3, maybe 4 cuts over the next 12 months. And they're going to say they're going to be fully data dependent, and the next cut is going to be conditional on further progress being made in the CPI forecast going forward. So I think the RBA cut, the RBNZ meet on Wednesday in New Zealand, and I think a 50 basis point cut there is pretty much assured as well.
All right, Chris Weston, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Now a quick look at some of the other top business stories from around the world. Lawyers in Argentina have filed 4 charges against President Javier Milei after he promoted the little-known Libra cryptocurrency on social media, only to delete the post hours later. The endorsement led to significant financial losses for investors as the token's value collapsed. Lawyers and experts claim the post was part of an illicit fraud scheme. South Korea's Data Protection Authority has suspended downloads of Chinese AI app DeepSeek over local privacy laws. The app will be allowed back once it meets South Korea's Personal Information Protection Act. Although downloads were suspended, DeepSeek's web service is still available in South Korea. The UK government has announced a $3.2 billion plan to support its steel industry as US tariffs loom. US President Donald Trump said he would impose 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from March. And Uber has filed a lawsuit against DoorDash, accusing it of anti-competitive tactics. It claims DoorDash pressured restaurants to work only with them by threatening penalties and higher fees. Uber says this harms competition and limits choices for restaurants. Still ahead on the programme, Sri Lanka unveils a bold economic plan, estimating to rise 5% and resumes debt repayments. We find out more after this short break. Artificial intelligence is evolving rapidly, with new contenders challenging established players. After his bid to buy OpenAI was rejected, Elon Musk introduced Grok 3 as a competitor to ChatGPT. The impact is being felt across tech and financial markets. Elon Musk's xAI is set to unveil Grok 3, a new AI chatbot, on Monday. This announcement has affected tech stocks, with companies like Microsoft and Alphabet experiencing slight declines. Investors are closely monitoring how Grok 3's introduction will affect the competitive landscape. Grok 3 aims to challenge established AI chatbots like ChatGPT and DeepSeek. Musk claims his AI chatbot possesses superior reasoning capabilities, potentially outperforming existing models. This development could reshape user preferences and market shares in the AI chatbot industry. The launch of Grok 3 could signify a pivotal moment in AI technology, with potential economic ramifications. As AI chatbots become more advanced, they could influence various sectors, from customer service to content creation. Businesses will need to adapt to this evolving landscape and could lead to shifts in employment and operational strategies. Let's cross now to Dr. Dennis-Kenji Kipker in Frankfurt. He's Research Director at the Cyber Intelligence Institute. Now, Elon Musk has announced the release of Grok 3, positioning it as a competitor to the likes of ChatGPT and DeepSeek. How do you see this affecting the current market?
It's difficult to say how Grok will compare to DeepSeek and ChatGPT. Elon Musk has already attracted attention in the past with some very exaggerated promises of the superiority of his technology. And so far, Grok has not been able to be tested publicly and independently. And DeepSeek is known for its strong performance in complex reasoning tasks, while ChatGPT is known for its ability to generate human-like text. So Grok is being developed with the goal of being able to understand and respond to complex questions in a creative way. And it's possible that it could outperform both DeepSeek and ChatGPT in certain areas. But nevertheless, the competition is tough. And it's currently impossible to say whether Grok performs better than the competition in all the aforementioned areas and tests. And Musk's offer to buy OpenAI could also make it clear that his company needs technology from OpenAI in order to remain competitive on the market in the long term.
Right, now the introduction of Grok 3 has had noticeable effects on tech stocks like Microsoft and Alphabet. What economic implications could this have for the broader tech industry?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's not yet possible to fully protect this impact, as a language model has not yet been subject to an independent evaluation, as I mentioned. However, if Grok provides to be a disruptive force, it could trigger a further race to innovate among tech giants, leading to newly increased investment in AI research and development, and also potentially accelerating the pace of some AI advancement. And furthermore, the success could reshape investor sentiment, favoring companies with strong AI capabilities and potentially also impacting valuations of those perceived to be lagging behind. And ultimately, and what I consider the most important point, is that increased competition and innovation could also benefit consumers through more advanced and accessible AI-powered products and services.
And integrating his chatbot into social media, how could that impact his X platform?
Yeah, I think it's a very important task for him to do so, because his X platform has been lagging some users due to lacking content moderation. And in my opinion, this might change the use of his X platform again, because when Grok will be integrated for free into his platform, this might be a competitive advantage that others do not have. But it is to say, for example, that we also have some other chatbots which offer their services for free. For example, Google has included Gemini into its platform for free. So it remains to be seen what will be the market impact of this decision finally.
All right, Dennis-Kenji Kipker from the Cyber Intelligence Institute, thank you very much for your analysis.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, Sri Lanka's new president has delivered his first full-year budget since sweeping into power last year. Anura Kumura Dissanayake, who is also the country's finance minister, has outlined the government's revenue and policy goals, seeking to keep a $3 billion International Monetary Fund bailout on track. The 2025 budget is transforming the $85 billion economy after defaulting on debt repayments in 2022. Colombo now plans to resume debt repayments in 2028. The government has projected a total expenditure of $14.3 billion, down by almost 40% from the previous year. A reduction in government spending was crucial for the country as it looks to secure the next tranche of about $333 million under the IMF bailout. Despite a cut in government spending, Dissanayake said he expects the economy to grow at 5% in the medium term. The government will also maintain a primary surplus of 2.3% of GDP. For more on this, we're joined by Jahan Pereira in Colombo. He's the Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Now, how realistic is Sri Lanka's 5% growth target in the medium term?
It is probably an optimistic figure because Sri Lanka's current rate of growth is around 3%. And as you just said, the government is going to reduce its spending, and it has also to start repaying its loans. It has to also meet certain criteria set by the IMF. So I think that the figures are meant to keep the morale of the people high. In sum, what the problem the government faces is that it inherited an economy that was in disarray, where people's income had fallen by at least 50% in 2022 when the country declared bankruptcy. And the government, obviously, it's very difficult for the government in these circumstances where it had declared bankruptcy to actually provide for the people, to increase their salaries, for instance. And that is what people are looking towards. So the government has to maintain the morale of people, but in a very difficult economic situation. Even now, as we see, the US has stopped giving USAID funding to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has been, it's not as if we get a lot of money from that, but the climate is not a very positive one. So I think this is an optimistic prediction.
And what impact could the 2.3% primary surplus have on public spending?
Yes, obviously. It is going to reduce public spending. Now, what the government has done is that it has tried to target some areas where people are going to benefit, such as increasing the scholarships to university students. But these are small ones. Increasing the amount of money given to orphanages. because it has to, as I said, maintain morale of people. But the macro picture is not a positive one. It's a bleak one. But nevertheless, the government is determined to keep to the IMF guidelines. And because it is out of that they hope in the future to access more credit from international lending institutions that can make the difference to the country.
Right, Jahan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for joining us. South Korea is bracing for new taxes on its US exports after President Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs on imports destined for the US. In particular, South Korean steel, aluminium and automobiles will likely be subject to tariffs. Meanwhile, South Korea currently suffers from a leadership vacuum due to the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol, complicating Seoul's ability to strike a deal with the American president. Frank Smith reports.
Now.
Okay. President Donald Trump on February the 11th signed an executive order for 25% tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum. South Korea exports millions of tons of steel to the U.S. yearly and enjoyed an exemption on tariffs likely not to be renewed. Experts worry where and when Trump's tariff spree will end.
Product-specific tariffs, such as applied to the steel and aluminum, possibly other industries like automobiles or pharmaceutical, there the Korean government have to take a carefully look at what's happening, and we have to wait and see what kind of card they will put on the table, because I don't think the Trump trade war is over yet. We don't know what really coming next.
While other countries have sought better terms through personal contacts with the U.S. leader, South Korea's current leadership vacuum with President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment places Seoul at a disadvantage. And the fact that South Korea is a major ally seems to mean little to the U.S. president. With Donald Trump back in the White House, there's uncertainty over a number of agreements between Seoul and Washington. Trump had previously threatened to significantly increase the amount that South Korea pays for the deployment of U.S. troops here. And on trade, Trump may seek to again renegotiate the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. The Korea-U.S. FTA took years to negotiate and involves 95% of goods. Still, South Korea's trade surplus has ballooned to more than $50 billion a year. However, taxing that trade will cost U.S. consumers.
It will have adverse effect on the U.S. domestic market. So, I guess the Korea and other countries will suffer a little bit, but eventually maybe American consumers suffer more because the inflation, a lot of things, prices will go up.
President Trump says the tariffs will cause prices to go down, placing the emphasis on the American jobs he says they'll create. During President Trump's first term, South Korea made large investments in American-based factories. Acting South Korean President Chae Sang-mook is looking at non-tariff barriers and diversifying trading partners and strategizing countermeasures to Trump's tariffs. Still, local South Korean production remains exposed.
Since the automobile industry has suppliers, it's not just the automobile companies that will collapse. And if the suppliers collapse as well, for South Korea's economy, employment and growth will be significantly affected.
President Trump on Friday said he would announce further tariffs on automobiles in April. Frank Smith, TRT World, Seoul.
Northern Chile is one of the driest places on Earth outside Antarctica, but that's not stopped farmers there from trying to grow crops in the desert. A local agricultural tech company is developing solutions they say are the future. From Arica, Michael Fox has the details.
Gloria Castro has been farming here for a decade. It's hard work, particularly in the desert.
Without water, there is no life.
Water is a scarce commodity. Castro uses drip irrigation to get moisture directly to the roots of plants. Soon, she'll again be planting fields of tomatoes and peppers in the greenhouses. But the air and the soil have to be just right.
What we need to do is work with variables like temperature and humidity.
It is not easy. This is the driest inhabited location on the planet. Farmers here are defying the elements. A new initiative from a local tech company is looking to test the limits of what's possible. The company is called Wacky Labs. They've been around for 10 years, and they believe the key is to monitor every little change in the microenvironment and make automatic adjustments so the plants get what they need. They've built their own software, hardware, and sensors. They've been testing them for years. Now, they're teaming up with others in a project they call the Desert Consortium.
We're setting up the watering system, the humidifiers, the exhaust fans.
It'll all be automated with dozens of sensors to read and adjust for small microclimates in the greenhouse. Here, they'll be growing lettuce and other greens. They expect to see the yield increase by up to 30%.
We are going to improve the quantity and the quality of production, because the less that you stress the plants from external climate conditions, the better the plants will develop.
Wacky Labs director Patricio Arias says this is the future of food production.
If you are capable of growing food in places as complicated as the desert, we can do it anywhere. We can be pioneers even of growing food of Earth, in spaceships, and even on a colony on Mars.
His team is already working to develop experiments for NASA. They believe the desert and the sky are the limit. Michael Fox, TRT World, Arica, Chile.
To Zambia next, where inflation has surged to 16%, driving fuel and food prices to historic highs. Many are finding it harder to survive with even basic necessities out of their price range. So how are Zambians coping, and what can be done to stabilize the economy? Fungasai Moronga reports from Lusaka.
People here say they are feeling the heat as the local currency known as the Zambian kwacha continues to lose value, hitting a series of record lows since the start of the year. A severe drought has also added extra pressure to the economy. Lusaka's markets are the lifeline for many Zambians, but rising food and fuel prices are squeezing both buyers and sellers. Everything is expensive now. I used to sell more, but customers are buying less because they can't afford it. For students, the rising cost of education is adding to the burden. Many are struggling to keep up with the tuition and living expenses.
To be honest, it affects us in very different ways. I have to constantly think about how to stay in school, but also manage, the resources. But everything keeps increasing.
Fuel costs are also rising, driven by the removal of fuel subsidies in 2022. Since then, petrol prices have risen by nearly 60%, while diesel prices have increased by about 40%.
My wife and I used to use, both cars to get to work and back home. But because of the rising fuel prices, we had to downgrade to one car and let go of the other, just so we could cushion some of the costs that we were facing, the high costs of living that we were facing.
Analysts had hoped Zambia's emergence from a public debt default early last year would have helped boost the economy. But the currency has weakened by roughly 3% since the restructuring deal and fallen by nearly 15% over the past 6 months.
In terms of solution, is that you must be speaking around having to be able to drive a double-digit GDP growth to be able to increase income levels within the country, because this is the basic challenge that is affecting everyone due to the rise in inflation.
The International Monetary Fund says Zambia has made progress in implementing reforms such as maintaining fiscal discipline, focusing on debt restructuring, and enhancing fiscal transparency.
The government says it also wants to increase spending on education and healthcare and boost the local production to counter inflationary pressures. However, many citizens say they have yet to feel the impact of these measures in their daily lives. Fungisai Moronga, TRT World, Lusaka, Zambia.
Well, that's all your business news for now. Thanks for watching. The news continues after Next Tech.